All right. So we talked about your experience with dance in high school, college, and beyond, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the mental challenges that you faced.
Okay.
So we touched on that a little bit with each one of those subject topics earlier, but specifically if I were to ask you that question, like what were some of the biggest mental challenges that you faced in dance throughout any of those chapters that we just discussed?
Mm-hmm.
What's the first thing that comes to mind?
So when I was on the song team in high school, there was like a lot of drama, and that's like a whole story that I could go through. But
What's the short version of the song team drama?
okay, so my freshman year I was on the team, and we had a coach. I'm not going to say names, but we had a coach that she really liked me at first, and she was very, very intense. And she created like an interesting culture. Like the seniors didn't like us, and we were supposed to like, be scared of the seniors and all that. But that was kind of the culture she created. And my friend went to China because her family's from China, and she was like, "Oh, I can have new uniforms made for everybody." And so she did that, comes back with these uniforms, and we're like trying them on, and she freaked out. The coach did not like that, and she pulled us aside during our lunch break and like yelled at us and was like cussing at us, this and that. And I ended up telling my grandma about it. Like, yeah, our coach was yelling at us during our lunch break, and my grandma was a teacher. She was in education. She was like, "That's illegal. They're not allowed to pull you out of your lunch break," this and that. And so she went and complained to the principal, which backfired on me. So that coach ended up hating me the rest of the year. And then we ended up getting new coaches for varsity and JV. And so when you're going into like your sophomore year, like you could be on the varsity team. You don't have to be on JV. So we had auditions, and I'm not trying to like toot my own horn, but like I was more advanced than a lot of the girls at the time.
A lot of the older girls.
Older girls and girls my age.
Okay.
So I think that the previous coach told the new one, like, "Here's the rundown. This is what happened." And I think she had it out for me. I truly believe that she told the new coach coming in, "Don't move Nicole up," and her friend, my best friend. So everyone else in my grade ended up going on to varsity except for me and my best friend. And I was crying. I was so upset. And I even like went to her separately, and I was like, "Why did I not make the team?" And she goes, "Because you didn't smile during the auditions. You didn't smile enough." I'm like, the fuck? Okay. So you wanted to know about like resilience too. That was one thing. This was like kind of my resilience story with all this. I stayed on JV, and obviously that like diminished my confidence. But I was like, okay, I'm going to push through this. Like, even though I wanted to quit, I'm like, okay, I'm going to be on the team. I'm going to prove myself and just do my best, and I'll get on varsity next year. So I even wanted to be captain of the JV team, and they had interviews one-on-one and then like separate things. And basically my coach, I loved her. She was awesome, our JV coach. Was doing my interview, and she was asking me questions like, "Why do you think you should be captain?" And, this and that. And I had zero confidence in myself. And she almost had to answer things for me. And maybe that was not just what the previous coach had done to me, but other things I was going through in my own life, like personal life. And this was right after my grandpa passed too. So it was just rough times. She was just like, "I really want to make you captain, but you just don't have the confidence. And I need you to be a little bit more sure of yourself." And like, that's like a leadership role. So I didn't end up becoming captain, and that burned too. I was just like, ooh, that like stings. So it was just like double whammy. Didn't make varsity, didn't become captain, even though I was like pulled back. And so I still pushed through. I was like, okay, I'll still stay on the team and just keep my head up, keep moving forward. And at the end of the year, we had an award ceremony, like a little banquet. And she gave me the coach's award. And she was like, I'm just so proud that you persevered, you pushed through. Like, you have been such a good leader and really good example of like what girls should be. Like, you know, you didn't let all of this stuff like hold you back and just like quit. So that happened. And then the following year I ended up making varsity and love that coach. Like, she was intense and like I think she was really good at being a coach, but there were some comments she would make to me sometimes. I remember 2 comments she made. One time we were at a basketball game and I was practicing my turns for the routine and I was just not hitting it. I was just not centered that day, just not doing well. As I'm just like practicing on the side. And she was like, just stop. It's like beating a dead horse. I was like, oh. So of course, you know, I'm like internalizing that and I kind of get like obsessive. That's just how I am. Like, I just dwell on it.
Yeah, I mean, sounds like that impacted you pretty significantly considering you remember that to this day. Probably vividly, if I had to guess.
Yeah. And it's just like, probably to her, like nothing. She probably doesn't even remember that. And then another time we were at camp and I was practicing my kicks and she was like, oh, I hate your kicks. And
just off the cuff, just, I hate your kicks.
Yeah. Just like your kicks are just, yeah. And she was also pregnant and just emotional our senior year. And then this was like the worst one. So she was pregnant and then she had to go on like maternity leave. And around like the beginning of the season, we would vote for captains. And I ended up getting voted to be captain of the varsity team and then another girl on the team. So we were supposed to be co-captains. And everyone voted on it. Obviously, it's like popular vote. And usually the coach will make like a big deal of it, get flowers and stuff. She literally pulled, you know, the results and she was like, okay, these are your captains. I didn't make this decision. And then that's it. And I was like, wow, like she doesn't want me to be captain. What the hell? And then she pulled me aside one day and she was like, just so you know, like I don't feel confident that you can be captain. So I'm going to kind of put you in like a co-captain role. So like your other captain's going to be more in charge.
So you were essentially like an assistant captain.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm just like, okay. And she starts like crying too because she's like pregnant and emotional. And I was like, the fuck's going on right now? Okay.
Yeah, sounds like it was more of a her thing than a you thing.
Probably.
But she was kind of taking it out on you a little bit.
Yeah. It felt like very like personal. And I'm just like, I don't understand what's going on. Like, why aren't you happy for me? This is what everyone else wants. Like, what is happening here?
Your code dancers, right, voted you to be captain.
Yeah. Yeah. My teammates did. And so she had to go on maternity leave. And just the school I went to was like very cliquey and dramatic. And, you know, it's like Mean Girls. Not that I was like bullied. Like I had a great group of friends. It just became weird on our team. And we were talking about like team dynamics earlier. Like it just got off our senior year. And I felt like I was dealing with just like other drama and then having to be a captain. So I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to have to be intense. And so I was just a lot more bossy and just taking that leadership role. And then she had to pull me aside one time. Like she called me while she was out and she's like, well, I didn't think I'd be having this conversation with you, but everybody's saying you're being way too intense and you need to scale it back a little bit. I'm just like, okay, well, I was told that you don't think I'm confident in this role, that I can't step up. I'm stepping up and you don't like that. So like, where does this leave me?
It's kind of made you feel like no matter what you did, it wasn't the right thing.
Yeah. So I just isolated a little bit and just, you know, stuck more to the girl that I was captain with. And I was like, yeah, this is kind of shitty, but just get through the year. So I'm proud of myself that I was captain. Like, I thought that was amazing. And I'm like, clearly this is what everybody wanted and felt that I deserved it. But I just didn't feel it. You know, I didn't feel rewarded, and I was like, that's kind of shitty. So I think her little comments that she made about like my actual dancing and then going through all that with being a captain, it just really diminished my confidence in myself, and I started to believe I sucked at dancing, that I put myself in beginner classes. Like I would go take classes at the Edge in LA, which is like a big studio. At the time it was like really popular. Now there's other ones that are bigger, but I stepped into a beginner jazz class and I was not pushing myself. I started like making myself smaller, not making my lines as big, like not kicking my leg as high. And I remember the teacher was like, I know you can kick your leg a lot further. Like something's holding you back. And even in like other classes, another teacher said like, you're holding back right now. I know there's a lot more in you. And looking back, reflecting on all that, like something switched in me mentally where I was like, I suck and I'm going to make myself like dance worse than my capabilities.
Yeah, because you were always a confident dancer, I feel like, up until that point, right? If you had to say, like, looking back at your earlier days of ballet, and you were dancing some hip hop at the time?
A little bit, like ballet, jazz, the song team.
Yeah. So if you had to say, like, you'd say you were a confident dancer, and you, as we discussed earlier, you were dancing up. As I would describe it, like dancing with women and men that were older than you. And so you were being kind of thrown into more challenging situations. And so I think you were always confident, right? You strike me as a confident person. The way that you talked about your dance career, you were confident. Yeah. And these coaches then really just like beat you down mentally, emotionally.
Yeah. Yeah, I was pretty confident, maybe even like overly confident at one point. And then, once she beat me down, I started to believe I sucked. And so that was something I had to work through. And eventually, once I joined that one company I told you about where they would pay us for gigs, I think that's where I kind of snapped out of it. And then I was like, okay, like...
You started to believe that you were actually as good as you thought you were previously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I kind of got over that, and then joining the hip hop team too, just stepping into a different style more deeply, or like I always did hip hop, but I didn't dive into it as much as I did on the hip hop team, obviously. Yeah, that definitely rebuilt my confidence too.